what I'm asking is this a closed situation, or do we see people pushing back in Slovakia? I know that people pushing back all over, but do we see in Slovakia people trying to push, using testimonies of survivors and trying to push this back into the center, or are people raising surrendering to reality? I do not criticize them, I'm just asking. Now I wanted to talk about the kinder, as you call them, as the British called the kinder transport children. First of all, is there really a distinctive identity of a kinder transport? Like when I hear your lectures, not only yours, when we hear other people researching kinder transport, there's the kinder.
Yeah.
Like the ultimative kinder, but actually these are, like, you can't say survivors are like that. We have to always to say there are survivors that are like that, but I see that when people talk about kinder, this is very strong, this idea of the researchers researching kinder, they have this like the typical kinder. And I'm asking this because also what you mentioned at the beginning and in the end, kinder are standing up for refugees, for example. Now, it is, I know that kinder are that there are kinder who are in the forefront and are putting their identity as kinder to fight for refugees. But I'm wondering, are all kinder committed to this, or I'm not sure. This is not to say that I know there are people like that, but I feel there's a very strong generalization here. Not only yours, it's general. And the other thing I want to say is about what is the kinder transport story. Now, we teach kinder transport in courses. Now, as Hayden White said, you can tell this story as a heroic story, you can talk about it as an adventure story, and you can talk about this as a tragedy.
Yeah.
Now, are we not in danger, because of new research that is very important, showing the problematics of kinder transport, are we not in danger of changing the story too much to the side of tragedy? We have a tragedy story. I'm thinking about Jennifer Craig Norton's book, The Kinder Transport Contesting Memory. I greatly recommend this book. But she has parts there where you see that, I mean, it wasn't that nice. Actually, we can say even that the British decision to accept children, I will talk about it, meant that a British decision to tear up Jewish families. It's that decision, the decision not to let young mothers come with their children, but in the British context, young mothers did evacuate with their children. In the Jewish concept, the decision of the kinder transport is an amazing decision. But it also meant, says Jennifer, the breaking up of Jewish families. It was a conscious decision to break up Jewish families. So there is some sort of, so I think I would like to hear what you say about this. Are we in danger of getting the story totally to the pendulum moving to the other side, or is there a way to find a balanced way to tell this story?
Thank you both for amazing presentations. My question is for Amy, and I think it connects to Boa's question, and that is, who is a kinder, and what is a kinder transport? Is it what was organized after the November pogrom? Because, as you said, there are different national settings, and in Sweden, for example, we talked about it this morning. We had the child quota in 1938, but we also had before 1938 the Jewish communities in Norway, Denmark, and Sweden organized summer camps for Jewish children. You know about this, and I think it was the summer of 1938 or 1939. The Jewish community in Oslo decided not to send back the children, but to establish an orphanage for them in Oslo, and they were negotiating with their parents back in Germany and Czechoslovakia. So are those children also part of the Kindertransport? Because they also have another story, and they had to, when the Nazis came and occupied Norway, they had to flee once again to Sweden, and some of the children were not at home when that happened, and they were deported and murdered in Auschwitz, but some of them came with a directive for the orphanage to Sweden.
I wonder whether, this is also to Amy, I wonder whether as part of your study, you're looking at the different auspices of the Kindertransport groups and the philosophies of the different groups and their policies, and how that impacted the individual Kinder and the rest of their lives, actually.
Yes, this is also a question to Amy. We should make a break so that it's time to answer. No, because I was wondering, obviously related to wars and a little bit also to Marlene, because you said these kinders, they came from obviously so many different national backgrounds, and I have the impression that there is indeed this transnational memory. By the way, a footnote question, how do you see it, the memory in Israel? You focused on Australia, New Zealand and so on, but I don't know so much other transnational examples of memory or memorization with regards to children. I mean, there are the Donera boys, but they are most often active in Australia. For example, there is no, let's say, youth Aliyah association, or I don't know, whatever. So, or there's an association of former trainees from the non-Zionist training site in Großbresen. Yes, they send these newsletters and so on. But why do you think it's so transnational? Is it due to, let's say, active individuals, for example? I think in the UK it was this Bertha so-and-so, and or is it maybe due to researchers who are interested in Kindertransport and began with the UK, then went to Sweden and Belgium and so on? On your opinion, not the ready-made answer.
I definitely have an answer.
And by the way, to Boas, I would say most often the Kindertransport is a very positive story of rescue and self-help and also. So I appreciate it that it's also this negative side.
So I have a question, Monica, for you. Your presentation was very interesting. I've written an article actually on the heroization of Nazi collaborators in Eastern Europe. So some of what you were talking about was interesting. And Andrea Petot's list that you wrote, which sort of characterizes East European Holocaust memory, was interesting. And so I have one sort of short comment and I have a question. My sort of addition to that list is, and this comes out of my own experience, what my relatives in Latvia have said to me about my research, that in the post-USSR, I would argue at least that one additional element of avoiding about talking, so I'll just give the example of Latvian complicity in the Holocaust, is because, and this is what some of my relatives have said to me, they say we don't want to give ammunition to Russian state propaganda, which is already inclined to use terms like fascist when they talk about Ukrainians, when they talk about Balts, right? So it's not so much a denial specifically, it's just kind of not wanting to give, more ammunition. I'm curious if you've ever heard something like that in Slovakia. And the second question is, how is Tissot, I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation. Tissot. How is he characterized in Slovak history texts, like school texts? How is he talked about? And how much of it is sort of a heroization and how much of it is kind of a more critical perspective? So thank you.
Thank you so much for these fascinating presentations. I have also a question to Monica. because I really enjoy your paper, your presentation, because very similar, many similarities with Ukraine as well. In Ukraine, maybe you know, last year we introduced National Remembrance Day in order to honor those rescues among the nations. And nowadays, when we have another period of decommunization of our street names, and so we rename to the names of those who rescued Jews. So we have the very similar trend, and I like your definition, era of righteous. It's really what we observe in Poland, in Ukraine as well. But I want to ask you, who are the memory actors, state, NGO, you know, in different levels, who push those two opposing narratives about collaborators and about rescuers? Because it's very interesting who are the main actors on the ground. Because in Ukraine, the main actors in pushing this, you know, righteous among the nation narrative is state and state institutions, and different NGO and local, you know, scholars who are dealing with memory are trying to challenge this narrative, but then they haven't so many tools as state have, so their voice is weak, and yeah, and we face many challenges. Thank you so much.
Yeah, gosh, there's a few. Okay, so yeah, Boaz, you talked about, are we going in the opposite direction where we're being, you know, is it too negative of a story? And I think in my work especially, I really try to present a balanced narrative, that I know stories where people were very much part of a family and really became like a very cherished child that was like a brother or sister or a child to the foster family. And then there are those, I suppose, more positive stories. But from all the kinder that I've interviewed, and over 100 now, that the more, I don't know if it's because of what we're talking about or them themselves, but there are more, I suppose, critical narratives that are coming forward. I think for so long, the Kindertransport has, as you said, been remembered so positively, like this, such a celebratory, even triumphalistic narrative, especially in Britain, that really, without being funny, it's less about the Kinder, it's more about what the British did, it's about British rescue, British hospitality. So I think that it's really good that all these more complex narratives that are coming into the discourse now. I think my argument, especially in museums in the chapter, is that British exhibitions are so celebratory. They even renationalise universal values and say, oh, but the British do them better. You know, and it's only really in temporary and travelling exhibitions that we're seeing these more critical narratives, but then they disappear. They're not there all the time. So I don't think the pendulum is swinging in the other direction. I think it's swinging towards the middle now, because it has been remembered so positively. And I think that the more we hear from survivors, and you know, that their focus on, as you said, like the refugee crisis. I mean, no, of course, not all Kinder are active in the refugee crisis. There are certain ones that are. But out of all the ones that I've interviewed, I'm so overwhelmed with how many second and third generation are, I suppose, in care careers, whether that be, I don't know, working with refugees, or counsellors, or as teachers, or you know, in those professions where they're so aware, this like, obviously they're not thinking about the Kindertransport constantly in connection to their careers, but it nevertheless is there, and it is part of why they do these things. So yeah, it's a very generalisation to say that all Kinder are active and, you know, championing refugee causes. But I'm so overcome as well by how many Kinder have set up charities or work with charities. This is a huge percentage. Again, I've only interviewed 100, but there was over 10,000. But out of the people I have interviewed, there is a huge number of people that are doing this, or just simple acts within the community, helping at the synagogue, or in hospitals or anything like that. There really is a drive to talk with other people, and Hannah in particular, I know that's only one person, but she has a real desire to reach out and connect, and a lot of people that, you know, World Jewish Relief, for example, a couple of years ago did a whole bike ride to talk about the kinder transport and the second gen and third gen experiences, but also they're constantly thinking about the refugee crisis. They've just done over the last 2 days a call, you know, to get more sponsorship for the refugee crisis, and the kinder transport is so centred to that. You asked about who is the kinder transportee and how is it organised? Yeah, I mean, when I started to talk about transnational memory and history of the kinder transport, one historian said, well, where do you draw the line? And I said, why do you need to draw the line? I do understand that because the book could go on and on and on and be volumes, but I think in Britain especially, we often think of the kinder transport as British, that it's been in this tight bubble, and that the kinder only came to Britain. Refugee organisations were talking with one another. This communication obviously broke down during the war, but prior to the war, they all knew what they were doing. Not necessarily all the ins and outs, but they were so aware what was happening. The Red Cross was as well, again an international organisation. The fact that the kinder went to other countries is only a narrative now that's really coming into exhibitions and memorials, and this, as somebody asked, you know, who is the driving force of this transnational memory, and you could say that institutions are, because they've learned more about the transnational experience because of interviews, because of lots of other things, but I would call them memory agents. So second, third gen survivors themselves are really part of this discourse, and individual researchers to a lesser degree, but it really is the institutions and the families. Really, I would say the families are really at the forefront of this, and then grassroots organisations. So a lot of charities and other people are working across borders to bring memories together. You also asked about the different backgrounds of the kinder. Yeah, I mean, the kinder came from several different homelands, and they went to so many different host nations. And I would see, for example, the kinder that come to Britain and then go to America in 1940, that is part of their longer kinder transport experience. Obviously, the movement from Britain to America is not a kinder transport in the sense that they've already fled from Germany, for example, but it's part of that wider story. They're fleeing there because they've been on a kinder transport. It really interesting, like, when does the kinder transport begin? And I think because we've seen it such in a British perspective, 1938 they come to Britain, we're not understanding that the kinder transport moves beyond those time frames. So in the book we're talking about moving the kinder transport temporally and conceptually as well. So, for example, the kinder that went to New Zealand came via Britain, but they came way before 38. They came in 36 and 37. But the British knew about that because they were going to New Zealand. The ones that you talked about, the Dinero, and you also have the Umra boys and girls, they came via Britain. One was interned, one went straight to Australia. You know, does each country have its own version of the kinder transport is something that we'll also discuss. And the last one, was about transnational and Israel. So I've argued in the book that national memories are still dominant. However, they are changing towards a transnational memory. But I'm still trying to understand what a transnational memory looks like. I can see that memory, we've defined transnational memory in the book 4 different ways. So travelling memory, where one memory, you know, moves to another nation and gets incorporated. Personal transnational memory. Memory just simultaneously existing in other countries. And then also, what's the last one? Oh, like network. So Frank Miser's Memorial Network, for example, operates across borders. The kinder transport the commemorations are definitely transnational, but the Kindertransport, especially the KTA in America, are part of the World Federation of Child Survivors of the Holocaust. So that is a more transnational group of broader child survivors, but that's everybody. It's not like you say, there aren't specific groups in other that may have a transnational network. And Israel Memory, finally, yes, it's something that's hopefully my next paper. Obviously we were at the Ghetto Fighters House yesterday and there was two Kindertransport stories on display. Why is the Kindertransport story in that museum? How does it connect with the other stories that are on display? It's at Yad Vashem, there's a small exhibition there. There's people in the room that I'm hopefully interviewing, and I'm going to Kibbutz Lavi tomorrow to talk with Kinder who set up this kibbutz. So for me, the Kinder were instrumental in part of the creation of Israel. They also fought against the British as well, so that's a totally different narrative. So I hope I've answered some of the questions, but I know there's so much more I could have said, and sorry about that.
Thank you. Thank you. So I started with Boaz's question. If there is tendency in Slovak society to put the Holocaust testimonies, survivors' testimonies to the center of the remembrance narrative, that they are there, but in a very special way. From the 90s, they are there. Today, also the smallest child in the school can tell you a story about a Holocaust survivor, but they are told, they are written or remembered in a way without context. It's there only the story. And who were the people around you when you was there and there? This is the problem, because from the beginning of the 21st century, there started also many activities, and I look on you, Marta, because who are the actors. So at the beginning, it was the state, because there was the aim to be in European Union, and there were conditions we need to fulfill and then step in. So we did it on the formal state level, but then also initiatives from the bottom up came, and there are like people from towns and villages who try to again discover the history of their own places. So, for example, students' projects, forgotten neighbors or disappeared neighbors. So these were titles of these projects, and so they did really a very good field work in their surrounding and discovered who lived on this and this street and who were the people who disappeared. But constantly it was like they were in a vacuum, they were not in a society, in a local society where there lived another people. There was not the question, what did my grandpa or grandma in that time? So this is what I meant in my presentation, that they are in the center, but in the wrong way, yes? Because there is no space to speak about the other actors of the process we today call Shoah or Holocaust. So, and also the Holocaust Museum, which is on the authentic place of the labor and concentration camp in Seret, repeats this mistake, or it's the narrative of the museum is a narrative of those who were inmates of the camp, so the perspective of the victims. But today there are researchers who did research in Seret and spoke with the non-Jewish eyewitnesses, so we can like to put together these perspectives and tell the whole story, but there it's not present in the narrative of the museum. So this is all constantly repeated. And about the local collaborators or Slovak collaborators and the image of Tiso in textbooks and historian books. So actually Slovaks had their own state, which was a lie of Third Reich. So they were like, there is the problem of the whole story, you know, because on one hand there are nationalists who speak, you know, this was an independent state and Slovaks can do what they want, blah blah. But on the other hand, there is the responsibility of the politics of the state, and this is the problem. So from the 90s, we have now a new generation's academics where they are divided. The nationalist one and the European one, I don't know, but the critical one, you know. And they produce articles, textbooks, and slightly differently interpret this historical past. So and also in school textbooks, you know. Although the official policy is the European one, there are these two tendencies constantly. And Tiso, this is like, I started with one example. I am also Holocaust educator, and I took one group of teachers who were really deeply involved in the teaching on Holocaust in the proper way. So we were on a one-week workshop at the Vase Conference House, and this was really intensive workshop, very good, structured, whatever. And the last discussion, my colleague Wolfgang Kaiser, he asked teachers, what is the question you never ever want to get in the classroom? And one of the, in my eyes, is cleverest teacher answered, question about this. So this is the problem. He was a Catholic priest. My country is still very, or the image is that is very religious, and so the critique of Tiso is possible only in academic papers and non-governmental organizations, and of course partly also between politicians. But it's the case of the double speeches, you know, that in one auditory they are telling something critical, and in another something else, not critical. So this is the problem. And last year when the Pope visited Slovakia, so everybody waited if he namely will mention Tiso in his speech. He didn't. Of course. Yeah, so therefore this is really like the best book, or who wrote the books about Jozef Tiso? Ivan Kamenec, very good Slovak historian, in, I think, late 90s. And then James Ward, American historian, and another American scholar, Madeleine Betkerty. She is living in Slovakia. She published 2 years ago Letters to Tiso, which this book is about the letters Jewish people wrote to Tiso to get his exception not to be under the Jewish racial code. So there are, of course, publication or other events, critical events, but in a general, the tendency is still the same, decades. And it's worse, actually, because the political situation is changing to rather not very democratic.
Can I say one more thing? I'll be 2 seconds.
Wait.
I was just going to say, it's just popped into my head as we're in Israel. In David Cesarani's book, he talks about the Kindertransport and Eichmann, and Eichmann uses it in 2 different ways. He means, obviously, rescue, but also movements in another direction. And in the Eichmann trial, it does say Kindertransport. I have the clip on my phone if anybody wants to watch it. And Kindertransport does not mean rescue here, it means deportation. So the term Kindertransport is used very differently throughout this period, and it's not used in English until way after the time. And then the Israel side of things, just very quickly, the kinder that were here also helped rehabilitate those that had come out of the camps, but also we were talking yesterday about when and how they come to Israel, but it's very different.
Okay, well, thank you both for really a fascinating panel.